Rome, the greatest empire of the ancient world. A civilization known for its architecture, its military, and its law. But behind the glory of marble temples and powerful emperors, there existed a darker reality, a world where death was not hidden, but celebrated. In the heart of Rome stood the arena, the most famous of them all, the Colosseum. Here, tens of thousands gathered, not for sport, but for spectacle. These were not random acts of violence. They were organized, funded, designed, a system of entertainment built on fear, power, control. Historians estimate that over 400,000 people died in Roman arenas across centuries, and what they witnessed were games so brutal they still shock the world today. These are the 11 most terrifying spectacles of ancient Rome. The first were known as funeral games. What began as a ritual, a duty to honor the dead, quickly transformed into something far more sinister. Originally introduced in 264 BC, these games forced prisoners to fight to the death. Not for justice, but for tradition. Over time, they became political tools. Elites used them to gain popularity, proving their power through bloodshed. Death became a performance. Then came the Venetians. Mass hunts staged inside the arena. Exotic animals were brought from across the empire: lions, elephants, bears. At the inauguration of the Colosseum alone, thousands of animals were slaughtered, not for survival, not for necessity, but for entertainment. The arena floor turned into a graveyard of creatures. As the crowd cheered, another disturbing spectacle was mismatched combat. These fights were never fair. Prisoners, slaves, or captured soldiers were forced to fight trained gladiators. With little to no chance of survival, sometimes they were given broken weapons, sometimes no weapons at all. The outcome was already decided. The purpose was not competition, it was humiliation. Perhaps one of the most horrifying punishments was damnatio ad bestias. Condemned criminals were thrown into the arena. To be devoured by wild beasts, there was no escape, no defense, only fear. The crowd watched as humans were torn apart. Turning execution into public entertainment, Rome didn't just kill, it staged death as art. In mythological executions, victims were forced to reenact famous legends. With a deadly twist, stories like Orpheus or Daedalus were brought to life, but instead of survival, the characters died for real. Myth and reality blurred, and tragedy became theater. Then there were the Naumachia, entire arenas flooded with water. To recreate naval battles, ships clashed, men drowned, and thousands could die in a single event. These were not small performances, they were massive productions. It's designed to demonstrate the power of Rome. Even women were not spared. Female gladiators were forced into combat, sometimes fighting each other, sometimes fighting men. In certain cases, they were made to fight without proper armor. Turning battle into spectacle, the presence shocked even Roman society. Yet the crowds demanded more. Some punishments were designed purely for terror. Living torches were among the cruelest. Humans were tied, covered in flammable material, set on fire. They were used as warnings. A message to the public. This is what happens when you defy Rome. Crucifixions were another common sight. Victims were executed slowly, publicly, painfully. Sometimes placed outside the arena, sometimes brought inside. As part of the show, even death had a schedule. But perhaps the most disturbing part of Roman entertainment was the emperors themselves. Rulers like Commodus didn't just watch the games, they participated. Commodus entered the arena, fighting with advantages, blunted weapons, helpless opponents. Every victory was staged, not to prove strength, but to display dominance. Finally came the persecution of Christians. What began as religious conflict, it became public spectacle. Followers of a new faith were executed in the arena, often fed to animals or forced into deadly performances. Their deaths were not hidden, they were displayed as a warning. But no empire can sustain itself on violence forever. The games drained Rome's resources, they hardened its people, and slowly, the culture began to shift. Thinkers like Seneca spoke of the cruelty, the loss of humanity. And over time, the arenas fell silent as the Roman Empire declined. So did its appetite for blood. The Colosseum, once filled with screams, became a ruin, a reminder of a civilization that entertained itself with death. These games were not just history, they were a reflection of what happens when power